Welcome to the Toronto St. Paul's Liberal Leadership Interview Series. I am Mike Sheeran, a proud member of the PLA and host. We are chatting with all of the amazing candidates running to be the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party. And remember, this is the first time we're electing a leader using the one member, one vote system. And as a result, when you do vote on Sunday, November 26th, you will not just be choosing one name, you will actually be ranking the candidates. So it's important to get to know everybody. And today we are joined by Member of Parliament for Beaches, East York, Nate Erskine-Smith. How are you, Nate?
Things are good. The kids are in school. My wife's doing work upstairs, and I've got a debate tonight. So I'm, doing a bit of prep work for that. I might go get a haircut before it. We'll see how it goes, if I can fit it in. And yeah, I'm glad to spend some time with you.
Well, tonight is debate night, and you've already experienced several of these before. What are you expecting tonight?
It'll be a bigger crowd. So we had a pretty good crowd in Stratford. Every debate seems to attract a larger crowd. Tonight we're here in Toronto, and it looks like it's sold out, and it's a 500 person theater. So that should be it's good news that there's momentum, there's interest, and it's the fourth debate I think we've had. We've got two more to go, but I expect it'll be a good opportunity to continue a conversation over the last three debates around really two questions. One is, what direction do we want for our party? And that's an important question. And two, who is best placed to beat Doug Ford? So as I think about the debate and my own statements and answers, I'm principally looking to answer those two questions.
So, because you have had several debates before this, is there new information that's coming out, or is everybody just kind of like getting more specific with what their message is?
I don't think there's really new information coming out. We have occasionally new platform planks that we'll launch. We recently launched one around democratic renewal and a commitment to both rebuilding our party, but also rebuilding trust at Queen's Park. So I'll have more to talk about on that than I did before, given that's now out and public. There are some new things in that regard, but otherwise it's just making sure that we are reinforcing messages and that we're getting to different issues. I mean, in the Stratford debate, we didn't get asked questions on healthcare, and so I expect we'll delve into healthcare issues and Ford's challenges and failings on that front. So making sure that we cover a broader set of issues at the same time.
So, what has emerged as the number one issue for you on this campaign?
I'd say there are four big issues that matter in different ways, but matter all across the province. And it is obviously healthcare and it's access to family doctors, mental health and addictions, aging with dignity, home and community care, of course, standards and long-term care, but especially emphasizing home and community care. It's education, investments inside and outside the classroom. So we set our kids up for success, respect for educators. It is not just healthcare and education, although those are two principal provincial responsibilities. It's also housing in every community. Affordable housing means different things in different communities, but we need to end exclusionary zoning. We need to build gentle density everywhere and greater density near transit. And then lastly, it is really around environmental protections, both with respect to strong climate action to protect the planet for our kids, but also nature protection and greenbelt preservation and expansion. So, I mean, stronger social safety net, democratic renewal, there are lots of different things that will come up, but it's those four big issues that come up absolutely everywhere. And then what is on everyone's minds at the same time is, how are we going to beat Doug Ford? And who is best placed to build the coalition to deliver change at Queen's Park?
Well, as you say, so traditionally, healthcare and education and the economy are kind of the three main things that we talk about provincially. But, I think housing has really come up as a priority issue for a lot of people. How would you address the housing crisis? And if you could speak about Toronto and Toronto St. Paul's, but also provincially at large.
Yeah, so I think we have to do three things fundamentally, and before even getting to those three things, I would say we have to think about how we articulate the challenge. And I think it's rightly articulated as a fairness challenge. And I oftentimes articulate it in the sense of, you've got young people today who cannot afford to live in their home communities, and the price of housing has well outstripped any increase in income over the last 50 years. And so we are really facing a generational fairness challenge. At the same time, it's an economic productivity challenge. So we do have to speak in economic terms, when young people are leaving their home communities and leaving our province because they can't afford to live here, it has knock-on consequences for our economic growth and productivity now and down the road. Now, what can we do about it? So I think we have to do three things, as I say. And the first is we have to end all barriers to building smart and sustainable growth. And what does that mean? It means, as of right, gentle density, fourplexes everywhere, greater density as of right on bus routes and transit routes, and of course, even greater density near GO stations, near subway stations, and near transit thoroughfares. So that's on the one hand, ending exclusionary zoning and making sure that we show provincial leadership on that front. The second piece is getting governments back in the game on non-market housing. And an example in my own riding, but we see the same challenges across Toronto. You see Metrolinx and other crown agencies that sell land, and in my case, a piece of land by the Main Street subway station, by the Danforth GO station, sold off to private hands. No public benefit comes back, and not a single affordable unit is built. Okay. We could do things very differently if we had leadership in the non-market space, and that's co-op and workforce housing, affordable rental housing, and we really do need governments to get back in the game on helping to build things in a direct way in the non-market space. And lastly, we should treat housing as a home first and an investment second. And that means, one, re-emphasizing rent control, smart rent control that is both going to encourage investment but also protect tenants. So stronger tenant protections is critical. At the same time, we have to, when we see investment come in the space, and investors at times crowd out people who are looking to buy for the first time, they increase overall costs. And when investment is going to come in, we want to attract investment to build. That is a good thing. When investment does come in, we want to align incentives so that investment is going to add density at all times. We don't want investment to come in and compete with first-time home buyers. We want investment to come in and either build something new, or if they're buying a residential resale unit, that they're adding units to it.
I'm interested in that last point as well, and the Airbnb effect. There's a website called InsideAirbnb.com that seemingly allows you to dig into some of the data. Now, according to that site in Toronto, there are 12,572 entire homes or apartments listed for short-term rentals. So 12,500 entire homes or apartments that are really just there for people to rent on Airbnb. Is this part of the problem?
It is part of the problem, and it's a good example actually because there is no single solution to addressing that challenge of treating housing as a home first and investment second, but this ought to be part of the answer. There's no question. Now, what do you do about it? Well, those who are renting a room in their home on Airbnb, those who are going away for the summer and renting their home, that makes perfect sense. That's why Airbnb began in the first place. Those who are renting out a basement suite to make sure that they can afford the primary residence that they bought in the first place. There are many examples where we don't want to have overly burdensome rules, but when you have half of condos in Toronto being bought by investors who are then in many cases doing what you're describing, that is a challenge. And it's a challenge because it's adding demand and not adding supply, and really crowding out people who are looking to acquire in the first place as a home. And so, yeah, there's no question we need to look at at a high level, it's that core message of treating housing as a home first and investment second. But there are many different things we can do within that to reach that ultimate goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we've mentioned, healthcare is the single largest line item in Ontario's budget. Where do you see opportunities for patient care improvement that are also fiscally responsible and reasonable?
Well, first off, we have to focus on the health human resource crisis and labor because it is an acute challenge. We lack of access to family doctors. 2.2 million people don't have access to family doctors. You look at the emergency room crisis, especially in rural and northern communities, where the inability to service emergency rooms and hospitals because of a lack of labor leads to poor patient care. And you look at home and long-term care, and I just had a meeting, collectively, leadership candidates had a meeting with healthcare workers, and they talked about every day they are short-staffed. And short staffing has consequences not only for their mental health, but it obviously has consequences on the care that they're able to provide. And so, number one, we have to address the health human resource crisis. Two, and this is an offshoot of the access to family doctors. It's not just doctors, it's health teams. We need to rethink how we deliver primary care. And it's not just doctors that are to deliver that care. Team-based care does two things: provides better care ultimately, but ultimately frees up time for those doctors and other professionals on that team to do the things that they're best at, and not to be looking after an administrative burden, for example, but to be treating patients. Lastly, and we can talk about long-term care and home and community care as well, but lastly, we really need to re-emphasize that mental health is health, and we need to make sure that there is coverage for people who suffering from depression and anxiety. And in the UK, for example, they provide for up to 12 hours of coverage for people talk therapy, and the results are beneficial both from the perspective of patient outcomes, but also from the perspective of making sure that things don't get worse for the system
Mhm.
overall. And so I do think there are any number of investments that we can make up front that will pay dividends down the road. But we should also be honest that if we want better healthcare, it's both about greater spending at times, and then it's also about how can we best allocate the dollars the most improve patient care.
Well, yeah, and to pick up on the long-term care, our population is aging, and it is going to become an even more acute issue in the coming decade. How do you see where we are with our long-term care and what we can do to improve that?
It is a great challenge, and obviously, many of us watched in horror when in the pandemic we saw the conditions of long-term care institutions in particular. And so, on the one hand, for those who do need to be in a long-term care facility, we need to make sure there are better standards, there are better patient to nurse and staff ratios, and that's a big part of it. There's no question. But when you take a step back and you think of the bigger picture, where do people want to age? They want to age at home and in their communities. And what is cheapest and most effective for delivering a public dollar here? Well, it's home and community care. What's the best quality care? It's home and community care. And how do we get there? Well, Denmark's often held up as an example of a country that does it much better than we do. They
Mm.
both spend more as a percentage of GDP, but they also spend differently. So for two-thirds of every dollar that they spend it on home and community care. In Canada, the situation is reversed. Two-thirds of every dollar we spend on institutional long-term care. So over time, we have to reverse that equation, and we have to more significantly look at our total envelope of spending and increase it for sure as we look at more seniors that are aging, and the pressures there. But we also need to make sure that we are reprioritizing home and community care, especially as you're looking to manage demographics. That if you're building these long-term care institutions, I know Doug Ford likes to brag about this bed and that bed that they're building that nobody wants to really be in. But beyond that, you're going to have at some point that demographic wave crest, and home and community care is going to allow you to manage those demographic differences and changes over time.
What does it take? Because I feel as though we've been talking about better home care for decades. And, what will it actually take for somebody to do something about it that's meaningful?
Good question. And I haven't been around for decades, so I don't know where all of the pitfalls are necessarily. But I would say a few different things. One is we've got to make sure that we run on it very clearly, so there's a mandate for it. Two, that we get into this knowing that this isn't going to be an overnight change. When you're spending two-thirds of every dollar on institutional care, that it's going to take time to turn the ship around and to make appropriate investments and to make sure that we are ultimately prioritizing home and community care. And lastly, it really is a conversation, to return to where I started, around labor. That if we don't
Mm.
have the healthcare workforce, and if we have people leaving the healthcare workforce because of a lack of pay or a lack of respect or the terrible work conditions and stress and the high workload and the inability to care for patients in the way that they want to care for them, if we don't manage our healthcare workforce with respect and decency, and responsibly not only attract people but retain people, then we aren't going to address the challenges that we need to address in the home care space.
Absolutely. You've crisscrossed the province. You've spoken with countless liberals. What have you learned that surprised you?
The thing that surprised me most in some ways is the wherever I am, the differences in some ways they come across as differences initially, but there are many similarities. And so, what's a good example? Uh, let's take mental health and addictions actually as an example. I got into this
Mhm.
race thinking my advocacy around mental health and addictions, my advocacy around treating substance use as a health issue might be a political liability. And then I'm traveling the province and I'm in Sioux Lookout, and there's a woman on the dock there that I get to chatting with. And she, at the beginning of the pandemic, she needed treatment. And so she ended up going to Milton because there was no on demand treatment close enough to her. And that's a real challenge that ought to be addressed. Then I'm speaking to the former executive director of the London Economic Development Corporation. And I wanted to talk about economic development in Southwestern Ontario. He's talking to me about mental health and addictions. And why? Because it is causing a deep impact and a negative impact on their downtown. And if you want to see main streets revitalized, you've got to address mental health, addictions, and homelessness. And we need a serious plan. When you speak to police officers, they say they don't want to police mental health, they don't want to police addictions, they don't want to police poverty. And
Mm.
we can both deliver better care for people in need and save lives. We can also better protect public safety by delivering public health. And there are different reasons people have come to the same answers. But in the end, a serious, progressive, I would say, but a really serious and ambitious policy proposal around addressing people in need, around treating substance use as a health issue with expanded harm reduction and treatment options, housing assistance, especially rapid housing to end homelessness. All of these solutions you might traditionally think purely from a social justice lens, but they are actually public safety issues. They are actually about revitalizing downtowns. And I think there's an opportunity to really unite people who come to an answer for different reasons, but ultimately arrive at the same conclusion.
I want to pivot a little bit. You are an MP. You know, you're doing okay up in Ottawa. Why would you want to become the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party?
It's a bit of madness, isn't it? I I left law for federal politics 10 years ago because the Liberal Party was in third place. We needed generational grassroots renewal in a serious way. I was incredibly frustrated by a cynical conservative majority government. And for me, that was the best way I could make a difference. My parents were both teachers in the East End of Toronto. I grew up here. I played baseball here. My whole life was really here, and an opportunity to really rebuild the Liberal Party. We were in third place, rebuild it in my home community. It was the best way I could make a difference. So I left law for politics. And I woke up after the last provincial election and we won in Beaches East York. It was a bizarre night because there was this moment of epiphany, sort of ecstasy, I should say, when, Mary Margaret wins and it's wonderful. And then you're surveying the rest of the province going, oh my God, like what just happened? And Mary Margaret's going, what have I got into? and I and I woke up after that election thinking, we're in the same place we were federally 10 years ago,
Mhm.
and we're in third place. We need that same generational grassroots renewal. We need to rebuild an active presence everywhere. We face a really frustrating, cynical, conservative majority government. And the difference is, I have 8 years now of experience in Parliament, of working across party lines to get things done, of a track record of, I would say, principled independence and advocacy that is, push the government at times to be the best version of itself, but also, I could run down a list of ways that I've been effective in Parliament as well. And so that core question, how do you make the biggest difference? Find me a bigger difference.
You know, should you become leader, how will you lead us to victory in the next election? Is it going to be a heavy lift, or is the conservative government sustaining enough self-inflicted wounds that it's actually like ours for the taking? What is your read on what 2026 might look like?
Ford is unquestionably inflicting all sorts of damage to our province and to his own government. You look at the Greenbelt scandal, you look at the privatization in the healthcare system, you look at the incompetence we see on both healthcare but also housing. You look at the lack of compassion for people on ODSP, and we could talk at length about the lack of integrity. At the same time, it's not going to be enough in the province of Ontario for people to want to vote against Doug Ford in order for us to win. There are three not Doug Ford parties in the province of Ontario. And if we say we're not Doug Ford and the choice is yours, well, we tried that in the last election. How did it go? And so we need to give people a reason to vote for us, and we need to build a progressive coalition of voters, yes, disenchanted progressive conservative voters who are mad about the Greenbelt scandal, who want responsible fiscal management, who want integrity at Queen's Park, want conservation of the Greenbelt, all of those things. But we also need to make sure that the swing voters between the Green Party and the Liberals, the swing voters between the NDP and the Liberals, and by the way, the Liberals who stayed home the last election, they come out and vote. Here's a stat for you. In the 2018 election, there were 42 ridings, okay? 42 ridings where the NDP and Liberals collectively gained 60% of the vote. Vote splitting hurt us, but 60% of the vote. In the last election, we went from 42 ridings with that kind of margin to 21 ridings. It dropped in half. Why? Because progressive voters stayed home. We need to give people a reason to vote, full stop. And then we have to give people a reason to vote for us. So I think it comes down to three things. It's relentlessly building an active presence absolutely everywhere on the ground, rebuilding riding associations, rebuilding volunteerism, re-engaging and just being present in a way that the Liberal Party might be in St. Paul's, but hasn't been in Sault Ste. Marie, for example. It really comes down to values. I mentioned the lack of integrity, compassion, and competence. Well, we need to embody those values. We need to be a party that is going to build things, look after those in need, and in all things carry ourselves with integrity. And we need a leader who's going to be trusted in that way. And lastly, it really does come down to serious ideas. Which party is going to be trusted on the Greenbelt? Which party is going to be trusted to deliver trust and integrity? Which party is going to be trusted on housing? Which party is going to be trusted to deliver serious change and articulate change in the healthcare system and defend public education and more? And if we are able to build that kind of a coalition, I'm very confident that we are building it and we are going to be able to build it. But we need to build that kind of a coalition, not only to set the right direction for our party, but in order to win and beat Doug Ford in 2026.
What about money? They've got a lot of money. How do we raise the money we will actually need to take them on?
A couple of different ways. I mean, one, there will always be larger donations. The max, unfortunately, Doug Ford doubled the max to now it's 3,350. We should be reducing that to the federal limits so we don't have the same influence of money. But there will be bigger max donations that come in. I think especially as we have a revitalized party with a leader who isn't connected to what came before and is able to bring a lot of new people in and excitement and generate that excitement, we're going to see money come in as well. But what I am most interested in when it comes to fundraising is not necessarily just all the big dollar donations. If the sign of building momentum in a movement is how many people are wanting to contribute to something with donations large and small. And in this leadership race, for example, we have been out fundraised by Mayor Crombie. There's no question. We're in second in fundraising though, and we have more donations in total than anyone. And so I think part of it is if you want to show an ability to build everywhere. Fundraising is partly you need the money to spend money to win. Partly, are you building something that people are contributing to and want to build with you? And we're now I think close to 1,300 donations, half of which are from people who have donated $200 or less. And I think that's going to be a big part of our. It has to be a big part of our grassroots renewal going forward is engaging donors that are smaller donors, but that are going to want to be part of something.
Well, speaking of grassroots, I want to go to some of the questions that have been submitted from our PLA members. We have spoken about healthcare, but Margaret has a question that I want to touch on because it's specifically about nurses. How will you tackle the shortage of nurses and address nurses choosing temp agencies over being permanent staff, violence against staff, working conditions, and speed up accreditation of foreign trade nurses?
Okay, so there are a number of things in that, and Ford obviously has completely undermined this process with Bill 124, and so all vestiges of that have to be done away with entirely, and we need to be on a fair footing right from the get-go with nurses. It's partly about pay, right? So that's part of the answer, but working conditions really matter. And what's especially challenging right now is the lack of ratios, the lack of any respect for those ratios is causing people to be burned out. People are not able to provide the care that they want to provide, and they're able to then leave the public system and have a better quality, better pay, better quality of work, and they are worse of all, the public system is actually paying more for the very same nurses to then work through these temp agencies. So I think we ultimately have to ensure that in the public system, we are attracting and retaining through pay and working conditions. And it's going to take, as I say, there's no snapping of the fingers and solving these challenges overnight, which is, I think, is the one challenge in politics. People want answers and they want them now and they want solutions now. We have to, as a credible, serious party, say we are going to relentlessly work to solve this challenge, but it isn't going to be overnight that we solve it. And we have to set our expectations. If I've learned anything in federal politics, it's, if you set expectations up here, you better meet those expectations. And it's better to really, in an open and honest way, say this is where we're at and this is where we need to go. On the question of foreign recognition of credentials, there's no question that we have to both expand the domestic supply in terms of like graduates and making sure we're attracting and retaining and keeping people in the profession because there's a huge exodus, but also as people are coming with professional skills, making sure that we are as much as possible doing accreditation before they get here, and when they get here that we are rapidly working with colleges to deliver that accreditation. That's a big part of the picture going forward, and it's part of our health plans as well.
Brian asks, if you don't win the leadership, will you run in the next provincial election or stay federal?
I am not going to run in the next federal election regardless. I am running in this race in particular, as I say, because I think this is where I can make the biggest difference. It'll depend upon that same consideration. If I lose this race, Mary Margaret is obviously already here in Beaches, East York. I don't like the idea of just picking some other riding just to be an MPP and not as leaders. So it'll depend upon the role that I'm able to play to affect a difference. And if that's as an MPP, it may well be. It may well not be though. Regardless, I'll do everything to defeat Doug Ford. There's no question about it. It's figuring out what that role looks like.
So we have a few minutes left, Nate, and thank you very much for this. Is there anything you'd like to say to our members? I would like you to have the opportunity to showcase you to everybody watching right now.
I would want to answer those two questions in some ways that I said it at the beginning. One is, what direction do we want for the party? And I want a party that is going to deliver serious leadership. I want a party that's going to be ambitious and deliver credible but ambitious plans on housing, on climate change. Catherine McKenna has joined our team for that very reason. I want a party that's going to take with great serious care solutions to the crisis we see in our healthcare system and to deliver a really strong public education. I don't want to see people who are leaving the public education system because they say they don't see the excellence they used to see. I want to defend public healthcare and public education in a serious way. So I think that's got to be the direction for our party. It's got to be a level of seriousness and competence. I mean, you can accuse Doug Ford of many different things. You're not going to accuse him of competence. And so we have to deliver that competence and we have to deliver that compassion. And above all things, we have to deliver that integrity. And we have to deliver those big ideas. So that's the direction I want to see for our party. And I want to see it really return to it in a really grassroots way, strong local representation, open competitive nominations. I want that ground game to be rebuilt by volunteers and communities who are going to have representatives that go off to Queen's Park and push me to be the best leader that I can be. So that's the direction that I want for the party. Now, on that question of who is best placed to beat Doug Ford, I actually think that if we deliver that kind of renewal, if we deliver that kind of progressive politics and show that ambition and show a track record, and I've got a track record of working in Ottawa to address the opioid crisis, to address climate change, to lift people out of poverty. I have a track record that I can point to of delivering on those core issues. And I think we are best placed to rebuild our party, to rebuild our province, and to rebuild that progressive coalition that is going to take us back to Queen's Park.
Well, thank you very much, Nate. And, raising money is a requirement in politics, and there's no shame in asking for donations. So if you would like to donate to Nate's campaign, please visit meetnate.ca/donate. And also please consider donating to our PLA. You can do so at ontarioliberal.ca/donate, but make sure you choose the Toronto St. Paul's option from the drop-down menu. Thank you again, Nate. This has been an absolute pleasure. Best of luck with the rest of the campaign and tonight. And thank everybody for joining us today. We will see you next time. Have a great day.